where we've worked with logistics teams. I've seen this in one of my clients, and where it was kind of, we were brought in late because they thought they could do it on their own, and then by that time it was a bit of a mess. But now there was an issue because they were getting heat from the COO and the CEO, because they couldn't actually go to market and they couldn't open up their site. And at that point, they got involved to say, what's going on? Can't we get this in? What's happening? And so you never want that to happen, because it's always kind of reacting to a situation. We want to proactively really de-risk before a serve is even shipped, and see what are going to be the obstacles before you necessarily even purchase the equipment. Hi, this is Noah Sussman from TecEx Global Solutions Director, and you are watching the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast.
Hi, it's Joshua Feinberg, host of the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast, and today I have a very special guest joining me. I'm welcoming Noah Sussman, who is Director of Global Solutions for TecEx. Noah's company is headquartered globally all over the world, and Noah is based in South Africa. Noah, welcome to the podcast.
Josh, thank you very much for having me. Excited to be here.
Excited to have you here as well. So you have a really, really fascinating background that took you through a number of chapters before you ended up specializing in data centers. I'm really curious if you could give us a little bit of walkthrough of how you ended up in this role, leading global solutions consulting around importing, exporting, and in and around the data center industry.
Sure, 100%. Yes, I've definitely led a varied life in the corporate space, or I wouldn't say corporate space, in the working space. Started out in law and worked a little bit in South Africa, more in a bit of litigation, a little bit of family law. Then went to New York, where I worked in securities and in SE, doing negotiations and documents, and contracts, and then moved back eventually to South Africa because I married a person from Chicago, and we decided to come back to South Africa where my family is. And I was involved in a few things outside of law, starting my own business and in other business development roles. And then about 8 years ago, I joined TecEx when they were about 2 years old. They're part of VAT IT, which is quite a large, a large private company that deals in the VAT space and has other products as well. They're also global, and this was one of their divisions that was starting out. And it was at a good point because it was just as companies were starting to roll out globally, and import-export was becoming a hot topic, especially in the IT, hardware, and networking space. And it was interesting because I brought in my legal skills, when we were kind of developing relationships and partnerships, and especially on the contract side, and then worked my way up to where I am now. And as I think data centers have popped up all over the world, and especially with AI now just exploding, it's just like the data center seem to be the center of attention.
So is there anything along the way in your career where you started working with IT infrastructure companies, or just anything with IT in general? Or was there anything within the securities litigation that led to spending a lot of time with tariffs? And I know you mentioned VAT, that's value-added tax. It's a different framework than people may be used to in the United States, right?
Correct. So VAT, value-added tax, VAT comes up a lot in import-export. I know that America does not have that form of taxing. Europe does, and South Africa does, and a number of other countries. So, I was familiar with VAT, obviously being a South African, because value-added tax is really where it's added to every product that you purchase. But not so much. I wasn't dealing a lot. I was in securities, but it was more on, when there was a company who had unregistered shares and wanted to then, sell off and register some of their shares, and maybe filings with the SEC. But my tech really started, I think, when I moved over to TecEx. I'd say that it's exploded in the last 8 years. So it's become a very hot topic. And we've seen it from just even in a home, like where you've had kids now. I mean, the kids now are having smartphones and iPads and the laptops. So across I think in every division, every area, there's just everyone's being exposed to tech in a way that it was never before. But I really became involved with tech and the data center industry when I moved over to TecEx.
When I think about the category that you operate within, where you talk a lot about being an IOR, an importer of record, I think of that kind of like as the first cousin to logistics and supply chain type of issues. And when I back to my earlier career, actually throughout a lot of my career in IT, there often have been supply chain challenges that have to do with constraints, like Intel running out of chips or hard drive shortages or LCD shortages or what have you. And that seemed to be the biggest challenge. But it seems a lot of the supply chain challenges now in the industry are not just manufacturing related, but actually have to do with policy issues on tariffs.
100%. I think that obviously there's always supply chain issues that we've been seeing. I mean, since COVID, we've been seeing a lot of bottlenecks in the supply chain, from whether it was lead times from the manufacturers. But what's become more apparent, and I think what a lot of people aren't aware, and this is where and I think this is where TecEx brings in true value, is the fact that when you import into foreign countries, there are compliance issues. So especially, and we'll talk obviously on the data center space. So it's the AI equipment, it's the networking equipment, it's the IT hardware. But in fact, it goes beyond data center space. It's if you have an office and you're opening up an office and you want to get your computers there, there are permit and licenses that are needed, and it's very much product dependent and country dependent. So I had a client who was shipping to Hong Kong, and this is back in the early days when I was at TecEx. They had no issue. So they would, from a compliance perspective. And then suddenly one day they called me that they had a stuck shipment. And the reason was that the product they were shipping in required a very specific permit. And that permit they didn't know about and they couldn't obtain. So we're definitely seeing a lot more compliance issues. And then also, I mean, we see in the news tariffs, taxes, duties are hot topics that if a company doesn't take appropriate precautions and really plan things properly before they go, their rollouts begin, they can run into countless expenses and unforeseen costs relating to, hardware not being cleared properly, or even not being given the designated and the correct HS codes, which are the harmonized, the tariff codes that determine what the taxes and duties are. So we're seeing a lot of companies running into that issue. And then I think also just the fact that you need a registered entity in every single country in order to be able to import. So most companies don't have a registered entity, and definitely not an entity that has the licenses to import. So because of the fact that so many companies are going global in a way that they were never, 10 years ago, we're seeing that the issues in the supply chain are a lot related to compliance, tariffs, and just setting up office in a foreign country.
So with all of this, I'm super curious, do you find that these challenges and underestimating the complexities of importing requirements, do you work more with data center operators? Do you work more with enterprises that have their own data centers, or pretty both equally split?
I would say it's very much everyone. It's the data center operators who have their own data centers. So there we work in two different ways. Number one is that if they're setting up a data center in a foreign country and they need to get their coolants, the cooling systems in, and the infrastructure that they need to set up the data center. So we will help them from a compliance aspect, as well as the full deployment. And then also for their customers. Remember now that their customers are going to be often foreign country companies and enterprise coming in to their data center so that their service can run in that particular country. So we partner up with them where they are able to offer their customers not only the colocation in the country, but the seamless deployment to get the equipment into the country. So that's the one. And then working with with enterprise who are building out their own data centers. So they need to get the equipment in, they need to build out, especially on the AI space now. We've got, it's not small systems that are going in, but you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of the GPUs and other AI equipment that really, if it's not done correctly, can result in lost money, lost margins, penalties. And to give you an example, and this is on a small scale because it's also happened with just one of my reseller clients. Their customers felt that their logistics teams were like, we can do this on ourselves. They didn't understand the complexities of what it means to actually deploy into a foreign country, because most people think it's FedEx, stick it in a box and ship it. And they were shipping a few, and it slipped through customs until one got stuck. And he said to me that customs did an audit on every single shipment and levied $1 million fine on this company and almost shut them down in that. I think it was in China, and it put a red flag on anything else they wanted to import. So there's real, impact of doing this wrong, and it can affect. I mean, can you imagine a company who's got about a go-to-market date? They've got a whole strategy in place, and now when it gets deployed, it gets stuck in customs for 6 months. I mean, that really derails the entire go-to-market strategy. And not only that, but can cost them actually their business in the foreign country.
So are these particular challenges popping up when they're at the commissioning stage, or do they sometimes run into these even before that?
Unfortunately, it's always left, well, not always, it's often left to where it's too late. So it's either like, we have goods stuck in customs, can you help? Or it's like, we've got to deploy this and we've been told that by FedEx that they can't actually do this and we need an IOR. Or it's like, oh my goodness, I've just assembled this entire rack and we're sending it to India, only to be told that we can't actually move it into India. So obviously, I don't have to tell you, but that's too late. And then we can help in some cases when it's stuck in customs, but we always say the real discussions should happen in the boardroom and at C-suite level when they're planning out their go-to-market strategy and they're planning out, the budgets and the costs and the funding that's needed, because if those aren't taken into account, I mean, I'll give you examples like lead times. So a lead time really depends on what the equipment is and where it's going, because your compliance will differ depending on the country. So if, for example, you're shipping into a country that has a compliance lead time of permits and licenses of, let's say, 3 weeks, and you haven't factored that in, and now you've arranged your engineers, you've arranged everything, you've taken, you want to go to market by a certain date, and now suddenly you've been told, well, we can't even get it through customs until another month or 3 weeks, whatever it is. Obviously, it's going to have a financial impact on your, on the bottom line of the company. So very much C-suite discussions, and also just for funding. People don't realize the costs it takes to deploy globally. If you're deploying $1 million of equipment into Europe, where you're talking about 21% to 25% VAT, that's besides any duties. I mean, that's a substantial amount. And if it's in the millions, or, and these are often things that are not taken into account at, when they're working on a budget and allocating funding, from the capital side. But the cash flow, often companies won't have a cash flow of the money needed to clear it through customs. And now it's a scrambling, and again, delays, and their whole go-to-market is kind of derailed.
This for sure is definitely not part of the glamorous story that people often hear when they think of the growth of the data center industry. I want to go back to something you mentioned before as well. Originally, I was asking if this tends to impact data center operators or enterprises with their own data centers. You said it's fairly equal, but then you brought up something really interesting as well. It's not just the operators themselves, it's the tenants of the operators, the clients of the operators. You mentioned resellers, certainly one big category of stakeholders within a colocation facility or hyperscale facility. There's also the clients themselves. Within these kinds of companies, you mentioned that the impact is so huge that it often reaches the C-level. Is this a headache for a CTO? Is this a headache for a CFO, a CEO, a board, a compliance officer? In the average size company, like mid-market, small enterprise kind of company, who usually is the primary point person that you're working with on this kind of project, on this kind of initiative?
Yeah, so it's a good question, that, because obviously companies differ just because of the fact that their whole infrastructure and maybe the way they work within their company is a little bit different. So it could fall either to the CTO, it could fall to the CFO. They often, what we find is that we'll get, if we're doing a global rollout, so maybe it's a company looking to build out data centers in multiple countries, we're looking at often talking to CTO, CFO. Sometimes it also will be the procurement person, maybe a CEO if it's like on the smaller scale, the company is not so big. We often start with, sometimes what will happen is the logistics or the shipping person will reach out to us, and they don't realize the complexity that goes into deploying. So, and then the cost that's associated with it. So at that point, they will loop it in their, I'd say their leadership team. What we've seen happen is that where we've worked with logistics teams, I've seen this in one of my clients, and where it was kind of, we were brought in late because they thought they could do it on their own, and then by that time it was a bit of a mess. But now there was an issue because they were getting heat from the COO and the CEO because they couldn't actually go to market, and they couldn't open up their site. And at that point, they got involved to say, what's going on? Can't we get this in? What's happening? And so you never want that to happen, because that's always kind of reacting to a situation. We want to proactively really de-risk before a server is even shipped, and see what are going to be the obstacles before you necessarily even purchase the equipment. Because if let's say India, there's certain limitations on, for example, Apple products that you can't, or refurbished secondhand products. So if a company has already purchased all the equipment with the intention of sending it into India, and now it's all Apple product, or it's all refurbished and they can't get it in, so now they actually cannot use that equipment. So we don't want it to be a reactive. We really want it to be a proactive discussion at the early stages of kind of planning what you want your strategy to look like in the foreign country, and what your global, how do you want to scale on globally, and then we kind of work with you to put everything in place.
So you've been with TecEx 8 years now. This is your first entree into the digital infrastructure data center industry. But after 8 years, I imagine you've learned quite a few things about what works and what doesn't tend to work. If you were approached by someone who's like really early on in their career, maybe even trying to figure out what they want their career to be, maybe they're a teen or someone in their early 20s, and they've heard about data centers. They don't consider themselves especially technical, similar to you. They may not have a deep background in like software development or engineering, and they're curious about what some of these client-facing careers might look like. What would you talk about with that young man, young lady over breakfast, coffee, to give some kind of mentoring advice to help them figure out what these career opportunities look like?
So look, we'll start off to say, like, I think nobody really knows what these career opportunities look like from day to day because they're changing so quickly. It's unbelievable what's happening in the data center space. And every time I go to a new conference and every time I open up a new article, there's something that's out there that's that's definitely cutting edge. And it's shifting and changing within the data center industry. So what I would say to someone is that if they are serious to come into the data center industry, to firstly look at all the gaps, see what there is. If you do have some background, you can bring it in. There's so many different opportunities from consulting and being on the edge, like, for example, where we sit in a consultant as well as actually physically deploying the equipment, to being right in the thick of things and really just maybe getting involved with the like NVIDIA and the companies that are out there that are cutting edge in the AI space, and just do a lot of research, I'd say reading, and just learn as you go, because I think there's a lot changing and there's a lot happening. And especially for women, it's not an industry that has a lot of women in. So it would definitely, I would say to the young woman out there, that there's a lot to be said about having a career in the data center industry. And again, it covers so many different verticals. So business development all the way to the technical, the software, the engineers, and really just, if you're open-minded and ready to just embrace the emerging technologies and see where your strengths lie, there's room within that data center industry, because there's just so many. It's happening also, I think, in every single vertical. So I was at VivaTech, which is a big conference that was out. It's in Paris. I think I saw online that they had about 300,000 to 500,000 people attending. And that was basically, it was a conference where they had startups that were showcasing their products, their AI products, and how it has an impact on their industry. And they were from every country, it was from everywhere: Africa, Europe, Asia, USA. And what was interesting to see how it covers so many different industries. So there was skincare, where AI is applicable in the skincare, and AI is applicable, in the logistics and in the medical side. So and all these, I mean, for the AI, it's essentially run off data centers. So I think there's so much space and opportunity within this industry.
Interesting too when you mention all of the different verticals, because a lot of sales professionals, a lot of like chief revenue officers, chief commercial officers, especially in smaller companies, often ask for input on like which niches, which verticals are best. And I ask them the same thing. I'm like, when you look at your marquee accounts, when you look at the logos on your website, when you look at your case studies, where have you had the most success? And it's usually an intersection of market opportunity, market access, specific competencies. We see a lot of companies now even specializing these roles by industry. It used to be that they would divvy up sales territories geographically. Sometimes they would divvy up by selling to small and medium-sized business versus mid-market versus enterprise, especially some of the more global companies in the space where there's hundreds, if not thousands of people in a sales organization. It's extremely common now to find people specializing in healthcare or manufacturing or telecommunications, because in order for their prospects and clients to want to go to them as a resource, they need to feel that there's a lot of value. And no one's booking time to talk with a salesperson anymore just to get them to read what's on the website or read the slides. They really have to see that deep expertise. They have to see you like as a peer.
100%. And it's so, and everything, the tech in each one is so different. So you really do have to become an expert in that area. And it's fascinating. It's just, I'll tell you, like, I just saw an article on that China has come out, or they're hoping by 2026, so that's not far away, with a robot that will have a womb and will be able to take a baby from fertilization all the way through to delivery in 10 months. And they say they're not far from, they're hoping that will be ready by 2026. And obviously there's a lot of, it's going to raise a lot of issues, and it's, there's those pro and against. And I'm actually doing my latest newsletter, I decided, because it's such an interesting topic. But I mean, it's just in every facet of our lives, AI is having an impact, and in every single vertical. So again, then we have access to so much through AI and through the internet. So you can't have a salesperson who is just like, here's my pamphlet, because they can do it, they can read it themselves, as you said. It's really bringing in not just an expertise on what you do, but how to fit it in within the entire industry. So I feel like sales development, if you are going into sales development, people are wanting relationships, they're wanting a partner, as opposed to just like a salesperson. And which is another thing I would say to anyone coming into the industry, is to know what I've seen in the last few years, is that it's very much driven by relationships. And this cold emailing and cold calling and trying to get in cold just is not having the same effect as building out those solid relationships and showing that, we can partner up, we can, we are a trustworthy partner, we have your back, and we can really like help you navigate an area that's just new to everybody.
I think even your career path has a similar kind of parallel to a lot of the people that I talk to that work for like colocation in sales or biz dev roles, where either they come from an engineering background or have an IT or computer science background. You're in a place where you're advising people on tariffs. You have a law background, litigation background. So like there's a lot of credibility to being able to talk with clients and like, what kind of insights does she have in addition to several years working in the data center space? Well, it comes from a litigation legal background, working in a lot of publicly traded companies.
100%. I had a conversation actually with somebody the other day out of the UK, and interestingly enough, he was a school teacher for 30 years, and now he's an AI consultant. And one of the things he said was that he was able, being a teacher, to really identify and get, take away all the kind of noise and get to, and put things down on paper, I guess in a concise, in a concise way, so that he's a value now to a C-suite who wants to cut through all the noise, because there's so much noise out there. So here it is, you have somebody who was literally in education now becoming an AI and hardware consultant to C-suite in companies of, he said one of the companies, I think, was like a $60 million company, revenue company. So there's so much opportunity, and it doesn't matter where you're coming from. It's just that there's so many skill sets that are needed, that there's rooms and for everybody to come in and find where you can really add your value.
I see it especially pronounced with the colocation operators, where the low end of the market is increasingly commoditized. It looks a lot like the commoditization that happened in web hosting 10 or 15 years ago. But the account executives that are thriving are technical enough that if they had the time and inkling, they could have a nights and weekends side job as a fractional CTO for small and medium-sized businesses. I don't think they're technical enough that they could be an enterprise CTO, but for a small company of a couple dozen accountants, lawyers, engineers, hospitality business, or something where there's no strong in-house IT talent, they could add a ton of value. Yeah. And that gives them much better credibility, much better positioning, much better leverage in the sales process, because it leads to trust. Education and trust are first cousins, which gives them access to the information on what's really going on internally, who's on the committee, what the issues really are, what the blockers are.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think companies, as I mentioned also, it's so new for everybody. Everyone's trying to navigate, and there's so much competition out there. To have a partner who you can trust and who you can feel like can help you when you're struggling and just to help you navigate, it's something that's so valuable in today's market. And interesting, I was speaking to a guy at NVIDIA, and he said to me that we're having this conversation, and he said that in today's industry, he said, with the AI, and the capabilities, a small startup can easily catch up to an old established big company if the old established big company does not actually integrate the AI and move forward with the times. So you're also looking at a case where it used to be you had, if you were kind of built yourself up in the market and you felt secure in that you've got the majority of the market share, no one can rock your boat, your competitors aren't going to touch you. It's not the case anymore. So if you're going to sit with and I've seen it, where you sit with some companies, they're the older companies, they've been around, the guys who've worked there for 30, 40 years, they're very set in the way they do things, and they refuse to change. And now they're facing customers who want change. So if you're not going to be adaptable and actually move with the change, I think you're going to get lost very quickly.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
Is that similar kind of advice that you'd offer to someone that's like kind of mid-career and really struggling to reinvent themselves? Or do you see a different kind of conversation with a former colleague of yours that you bump into at a conference or in the airport and you're catching up with them and you sense they're a little bit burned out and looking for some advice on how to get back on track?
I'd say it's similar. I'd say that I'd say you've got so much expertise. So they may have expertise, for example, in one area, but today the data centers are also very interdependent, which I think has also things have become much more like, an ecosystem than it used to be. So it may be that I think someone out there has to also be fluid and kind of educate themselves in other areas and know that they can bring their skills and their expertise that they have and bring it into, find the gaps. And there's so much. I mean, what I'm seeing a lot of are people going into business development. It's interesting, but there's a lot of people who, as you mentioned also, who were professionals, and they found that business development is an interesting space to be in, because, as you mentioned, business development today is not just about, here's my pamphlet, do you want to buy one? But it's really it's about partnership, and partnership, not just at the initial part of the sales cycle and then goodbye, but kind of, being there with them throughout the entire, beyond the sales cycle, and just being the trusted partner. And what I'm seeing a lot is people bounce around. So in this industry, people are bouncing around. So they'll be 2 years at one company, that company gets bought out by someone else, so they bounce to another company because they don't like the way it was, where they fell when the dust settled, and they bounce into totally different areas. So there's so much opportunity. It's just a matter of being open and finding that opportunity. And again, developing, I think, as you go along, solid relationships and leaning on those your network and your relationships that they've developed, because those are what my personal opinion is that's gold in this industry. Your network and your relationship will get you, because you have to talk to the right person, and that right person, I promise you, is being inundated by so much noise and by so many people. So that introduction, or that, really makes it, you kind of stand out amongst the noise, and for them to listen. So I would say also you've got a network, leverage your network.
It's a fantastic point as well with the richness of the ecosystem. We catalog 52 different business models across data center tech, facilities, construction, real estate investment, and outsourced sales and marketing, in addition to 5 different kinds of data center operator providers, like 57 different business models that you could potentially have these entry points with. And not everyone perfectly is a permutation or combination, but if you take 57 to the second power, it's a lot of different places for people to bounce around within. So TecEx, by the nature of what you do, you're working on both with technologists and facilities professionals, right?
Correct.
Crossing both sides of that. Yeah.
No, 100%. We work along. I mean, and we'll work. I mean, firstly, we work on the channel. So we work from the OEMs. You know, an OEM has an RMA. Let's say the equipment goes to data center in France from the US, and now there's a piece that breaks down. So the OEM's the one who often carries a responsibility to drop ship it to the data center. So now they need to get across border. So we'll work with OEMs, or sometimes you'll have a large enterprise coming directly to an OEM and saying to an OEM, I want to purchase directly to you because I've got 20 sites. So I want to just, work directly with you. But I expect you to drop ship to every site. So they run into the same issues. And then you see this across their whole channel. So we're actually seeing our clients, a lot of our clients, in multiple places in the channel. So we'll work for the OEM who's actually supporting their RMA, in the data center that maybe we even sent the original equipment to, and we're working through with through an end user, through a reseller, because a reseller selling to the end user, and the end user is, please drop ship for me. I need you to take care of the compliance and everything. And then the end user themselves may come to us and say, okay, I need you as well to do things for me. So it's what that actually highlights is the fact that there is so much going on within an end user that you could see them across the entire channel, and each team isn't aware of what the other team is doing. So it's very much, that's also why we like to try get in, not at one team, but more on an executive decision-making level where it can be funneled throughout the entire company. So yes, we work along the entire channel and across from a company, across the guy who's actually shipping, because obviously we have a team who takes care of the technical details of deploying and getting it through customs and getting it into the country, and then obviously the C-suite and the board and executive or decision makers when we kind of working on budgets and project, kind of what will the project look like, and then we project manage it through the whole process.
A lot of coordination, a lot of alignment to make happen, different disciplines, different personalities, different priorities.
Correct, which is why we work with each client as a client. So in other words, as a, it's not a one service fits all. It's very much what is the unique, what are you looking for and what are you trying to achieve? And let's see how we can help you do that.
Over time, who have you found to be the perfect foot in the door for you? Was that the ideal stakeholder to be your internal champion, as opposed to getting cut out of the loop and having to undo a lot of damage that they did before you arrived?
So I would say definitely higher up in the decision-making process. So we can have, as we'll often see, we'll work with, maybe there'll be a shipping manager or logistics guy who comes to us. They're totally aware of the issues, but they're just not getting the budgets allocated to them. They're not getting the buy-in from executive level, because executive level doesn't understand the complexity and the risk that's involved in doing it, and they kind of see it as it's not our discussion. So there, it's a case of they may champion for us, but they just don't have that decision-making power. So I would say it's always very much trying to find someone at executive level who has the ability to knock on a door and be listened to. So I have a few people who have said to me, your service would be so invaluable. It's what we need. But when they've knocked on the doors haven't opened. So it's very much finding that person in the company. And that could be, it depends. Sometimes a CTO, sometimes a procurement officer. It really depends on the layout of the company.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, if you get in early enough, it's risk management, it's insurance, it's peace of mind. If you don't get early in enough, you're the emergency room physician trying to save the project from being a timeline and financial disaster.
And to tell you, I mean, I had a case of a client who came to us because they tried to do it themselves. Obviously, it's like anything. You know what? You want a great value. We add tremendous value. I mean, at the end of the day, if you work with us, we'll save a company time, money, and margin. But a lot of people don't want to pay for that because they don't see it necessarily straight away. So, like anything, we add tremendous value, but people don't like the cost that they have to pay for it, so they try to do it themselves. So I had two situations I can think of straight off like this, and there's many more. One was a company who also, they were like, the budgets were too pricey and this, and like, all these excuses. Couldn't even get them on a call to engage. And then one day, like 3-4 months later, the guy calls me up and he's like, and this was on the logistics level, he's like, Noah, I'll pay you whatever it takes. I need your help. We have 5 stuck shipments in Mexico, and it's been sitting there for 3 months. I'm getting huge heat from the executive level, like C-suite, because they don't understand why we have, we're not already like up and running. And it was too late. All 5 were destroyed by customs or FedEx. So basically what that meant is that it was 3 months delay. It was all the time and energy that he put into this that could have been utilized elsewhere. And more importantly, they lost all the equipment. So they paid for equipment that they then lost, and all their clients who they were banking on in those 3 months made other plans. So at the end of the day, the impact was really, deep within that company. So that's one case scenario. Another case scenario is also that same story, shipping to Europe prior Brexit. So they used to ship on their UK entity because that was possible before Brexit, but they didn't understand the implications of Brexit. So they shipped some servers to their data centers in Germany, and they figured they'll just use their entity that they had been importing on prior to Brexit, and they got stuck in customs. And at that point, they came to us. But again, it took 3 weeks to get it unstuck. I think they had to pay $10,000 of penalties every week to the data center. So besides paying all the full fees and besides everything else, they had to pay an additional $30,000 just up front right there. And again, they lost their 3-4 weeks, which in this industry, especially the competitiveness and with the fast changing and the fast pace of new equipment coming out, you can't, 3 months is equivalent to 3-4 years in the time frame. So it's something that one's got to think carefully, and that's why I also feel like if our champion is a C-suite decision maker who understands how the company works and what the loss to the company and the impact will be if it's not done correctly, then like anything, they understand the value we're adding, and that what they're paying for is going to be very much worthwhile.
Is the timing of addressing this something that usually impacts who ends up paying for your fees and paying for the government fines and tariffs, or does that not matter nearly as much? Or in other words, like how do they figure out who's absorbing the cost of this? Is it split? Is it shifted? Is it clear in the agreements going into this who's bearing the risk for these kinds of costs?
Well, that's an excellent question, because I've seen that as well across in my experience, is that, so when you talk about, obviously at the end of the day, an end user building out a data center is the one who should and normally bears the cost of scaling and going global. So, because they are the ones who are going to see the revenue and they're building it out, so it's a CapEx cost for them. But what happens is that when they go to a reseller or to an OEM, and they say to, these end users today, they want what they call DDP. They want it drop shipped to the end address. So if they're shipping to 6 global locations, they want the reseller to drop ship to all 6 locations, which means that they're not involved and all the resellers got to sort it out. So there, the reseller could potentially come to TecEx and say, I have a potential project with company X. Can you help us? What are the costs? So one of the things about one of the value adds that we bring to the table is we're able to look at the full cost of the deployment, including the taxes and the tariffs and the duties and everything, so that you can budget accordingly. So it's so vital that we work at the right time, that our costs can be then put in to the costs that are going to the end user for the equipment and for all the services, so that we can it can then get rolled over and they don't have to absorb it. And to give you an example is that we have a client who came to us many years ago because they had some stuck shipments in a country, and their FedEx told them they need an IOR. They need to have an entity in country. So they found us on the web and we engaged with them. And what they had done is that their sales team did not understand what DDP means, which is essentially meaning that the company is responsible to get it to the end address. And they negotiated a contract. And this was for a company it's a continual contract of hundreds of devices going globally. And it was some kind of scanning device. And they agreed, I think it was something that they would split the costs of the deployments with the end user. So the reseller would absorb some. And the reason they set this up is because they did not understand any form of global deployment. They did not understand what DDP was, and they did not understand the implications. And to this day, they have absorbed hundreds of thousands of dollars because of the mistake that the sales team made. So we try to work with the sales team. Sometimes we get pushed back because it's like, well, why would I call logistics in for a sales? And I'm like, bring us in early on, because we don't want you to either lose a deal because you didn't understand what the end user was looking for, or we don't want you to price it wrong and you end up eating your margin. Because that's the other case that happened recently. Someone came to us, their salesperson priced it. He thought that it was global, so all they would do was get the distributor to drop ship in the country, but he had no concept how it works, so they had to also eat all the costs. So it's something that, you know, people in the industry have to realize, that you need to partner with someone who understands global deployment. Otherwise, it can affect your bottom line, it can affect your margins, and you can end up absorbing a lot of costs that you really don't want to be absorbing.
So with all of these mistakes, it sounds like one of the biggest ones of all is the sales leader of the channel partner organization not investing in bringing you in proactively to educate their sales team on what it takes to have these cross-border deals happen profitably and successfully over time.
I would say definitely that is I would say a big part of it. And then on the enterprise side, for an end user, it's not having the right people at C-suite to come in and understand that whether it's the COO or the CTO or the procurement guy or the CEO, if it's not so big, understanding that the true implications of global deployment.
So it's somehow lighting enough of a spark for them to be motivated to want to learn this by introducing them to success stories, or lack thereof, anonymized at least, of others who've gone through similar kinds of challenges, completely overlooked these issues, and had some very expensive lessons along the way. In a lot of what you're describing, it sounds very similar to the kind of challenge of selling cybersecurity, where no one wants to invest 7-8 figures into a cybersecurity program until
they get hit.
Yeah.
And that's good for 100%. And I think also on the data center side, where it's so important is, again, you want to sell the colocation. Your data center is useless if it's not filled with customers. So, if you are a data center provider, and but if how does it help you if you sell the space and the end user can't actually get the equipment in? So again, working with that sales team, it's ensuring that not only are we filling the space and the equipment's going to come in timelessly, but it's a value add that can differentiate yourself from other data centers. That not only are we giving the space, but we're ensuring, or we're going to introduce you to a partner who's going to ensure that your deployment's going to happen risk-free and very much in a smooth, way, and that your go-to-market dates will actually be accurate. So 100%. And then just another thing as well, which I think, which is also very important, what a lot of people is that it's not only from a proactive of, okay, this is what we can do because we have a client asking, but it's a great way to win new business. It really differentiates you. So if you're a reseller in the data center space, being able to go to a global company or a global data center and say to them, exactly this, we'll sell you a centralized procure. We'll work on a centralized procurement model. So instead of thinking you have to buy, if you're setting up a data center, thinking I have to buy in Europe the equipment and I have to buy in India, you can buy from your trusted reseller in the US, and because you're buying bulk now, you can get better pricing. Because it's all together, you can have uniformity across all your sites. You can have everything configured, all the same and staged, and then use that TecEx to deploy it to the different sites. So it's a great proactive way for a sales team to go out and make new business. And I have a client who, it was actually one of my first clients about 8 years ago. And it was in St. Louis, and I went to this company and I approached them. And at that time I spoke with, his title I think was a controller. And I said to him, this is what we do. And he said, it's so interesting because at that time, now remember 8 years ago, the market looked very different. But he said that it's so interesting because they have a lot of companies who are headquartered in the US and have manufacturing plants and sites and data centers in other countries. But they won't sell to them on a global scale because they cannot get the gear to the foreign country. They'd run into issues. So they were turning away business because of the fact, and I've heard this often, that people say, we won't deal with it because it's too complex. So they'll sell to the headquarters for the local stuff, and then the business goes to someone else. So he said they were losing clients. So I said, become a partner and try with this model to see if you can proactively get your sales team to find a company that's willing to, where you can do a centralized procurement. And they won a bid. We helped them win a bid. And I think it was for about $1 million. And that's 8 years ago, before the AI, of equipment. This company had offices, I think, in about 15 global locations. And we deployed, we did the full deployment for them. And since then, I think they had like 5 or 6 additional global clients that they only got because they entered into this partnership with TecEx. So proactively, they were able to use this partnership to increase their sales and revenue.
So the initial foot in the door started with someone on the finance side, a controller who was looking at this as a way to streamline accounts payable, larger invoices from fewer vendors.
Correct. And also just not turn away business, because which they were doing. And why not service and offer a global scale? So he was open-minded. In fact, I have a lot of gratitude towards him because he was like, as I said, one of my first clients. But he said to me that he walked into the CEO's office because we were on a upfront invoicing at that time, and he had to. And we were taking possession of all the equipment. So we weren't taking ownership. We were just taking it into our possession to distribute to all the 15 locations. And you're talking about $1 million of equipment, and they had to pay us in 7 days for the costs of all the taxes or duties of deployment. So it was a hefty invoice. And he said to me, he walked into the CEO's office and he said, okay, I've met this woman from South Africa, mind you, who says they have this company. She wants my money. She wants the equipment. Is it going to be my job if it goes wrong? And he was like, yes. And I mean, 8 years later, I think we still, work very much together. And, he took that jump, which was, and that risk. And I'm forever grateful because, as I said, he was one of my first, clients. But he was able to really proactively take the company in a different direction. And I've seen this with multiple clients. It's about being also open-minded. It's about really being just willing to move with the times and realize that, it's not like it used to be where you can do this all in-house. There's too much at risk. There's too much. It's too complex, and the world is, it may be a smaller place, but it's definitely become much more compartmentalized. I mean, we can see that. I mean, the Cold War may have ended, but we've got other issues.
Yeah, very, very complex. Noah, when you look into your crystal ball, what do you think may change about what you spend your time on each week with your clients over the next 2, 3, 4 years?
Sure, that is a difficult question, because I think it's hard to know what the industry is going to look like in a year, never mind 4 to 5 years. But I think that one thing I do think that will be around is the compliance. I think that the world, as I said, it's getting smaller. Companies are rolling out into 50, 60, 70, 80 countries to, some of them 150 countries to do their, to offer their services in. But there's still very much restrictions, and I feel like there's going to be a lot of discussion still around how do we get the equipment in. I think sustainability is going to be a big question. Sustainability, taxes, duties. I think what's becoming a hot topic now is data. Who's data sovereignty? Who owns the data? And we don't know where China will be and what the impact will be with that. So I feel like a lot will be around still around the compliance and the tariffs, duties. I don't think that's going to go away. The tech may change, and the world may look different, but I feel like there will still be that compliance part.
So if you were hoping that your playbook gets simpler in the coming years, it sounds like there's so many external factors at work that you will perpetually be updating your processes and institutional knowledge needed to be the director of global solutions at TecEx.
Yeah, sure. It's I don't know where. Yeah, I agree. I think it's gonna be. I mean, we see like it's funny because after COVID, we had some bottlenecks in COVID. Obviously there was the bottleneck of there were no containers. The rates of freight and containers went skyrocket because everyone was ordering online, and everyone was so it had to be shipped to them. So there was that bottleneck, and then I think there was other issues after COVID, and then there became I think there was the lead times issues. There's been one issue after another, and now I mean if you look at the last year, then there was Ukraine and Russia, and now there's it's all the tariffs, and so I just feel like there's things that just pop up when we think things are settling down. Something else just pops up, and it pivots. I think we'll be using very different equipment and moving different tech, and I think the world will look like a different place. But I think that compliance will be there, unless by some miracle the world's become one open playground, which doesn't look like it's happening anytime soon.
Noah, do you have any favorite apps or productivity tools that you use on a regular basis that are just so indispensable that you couldn't do your job effectively without? In other words, like if someone from your finance team or your IT team came to you and said, we need your help. We've had just too much sprawl, too much SaaS in this company. We have 871 different applications. So what's on your top 5 list? What are your top 2, 3 apps that you'd fight really hard to hold on to that are really critical for you and your team?
So I would say definitely ChatGPT is a great app just to kind of use. Sometimes you just don't have the right wording. So you know what you're going to talk about, but you don't have the right wording, and so that's definitely great. I would say we have an app called Navan, which is we do a lot of traveling. I do a lot of traveling, go global, and I can literally 5 minutes before book play tickets and hotels and rent cars, and it pulls up data from everywhere, and it's a pleasure to use. So I definitely feel that one is indispensable. And yeah, I think and I think Teams, I mean, we use a lot of Teams is is a great form of communication, which we use within our not only do we use it within TecEx, but I see a lot of our clients use it. And it's a great way of communication, and especially also as a meeting, for meetings. It's I find that across the board, it's one of the easier ones to use. And that's also something that I think since COVID, just having meetings with videos is a huge value. So that's also, I'd say those are the top three.
What was the name of the travel app again for those that are watching that may have a 50% plus travel job? Is that an internal application that you built?
And I have no stake in it. So it's called Navan, Navan.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll make sure to include that with the show notes, because there are a lot of people that spend a lot of time traveling in this, even besides just conferences, just traveling to client sites. I know a lot of people that do logistics and supply chain work and commissioning big data center projects that are easily on the road 25, 30 weeks out of the year, sometimes more.
Yeah. No, it's great. It gives you, I mean, from a corporate perspective, it puts in, you can adjust it to, as per person, you can do it per employee, what how much they can spend in a specific place. And it literally will aggregate, like, let's say you're looking for a hotel in San Francisco, it will aggregate. So you can kind of say, okay, so I think the company has a policy. They'll work on the back end and say, pull up all 3-star to 4-star hotels within this policy, within a certain ratio, I guess, of money or spend in those locations, and it will aggregate. So if the hotels are higher that week, then obviously your in the amount that you can spend on a hotel goes up. So it's actually great. So, and then all you have to do, it'll pull up a list of, like, let's say 15, 20 hotels with all the information, and all you have to do is click on it. You can literally, the credit card's already in it, and you can book right on site. So I often don't know until the last minute, like the timings, of my meetings or where exactly I'm going to be. And I've sat on a plane as I'm about to land and say, okay, I better book a hotel, and it takes me 2 minutes. So it is a pleasure.
AI meets the traditional old-fashioned travel agent plus the personal assistant plus a little bit of spend management baked into it at the same time.
100%. So corporates got visibility. They know it's being spent, but you've got flexibility in, you can choose whatever hotel, whatever airline suits you within that, within that kind of budget. So it's great. But the one thing I'll tell you with AI, which I love the best with travel, is the fact that now they're going for facial recognition, and in some places. So like when I go in the UK, and I'm boarding my flight, like back to South Africa, I don't even take out a boarding pass or passport. It's just you walk up to this machine, does facial recognition, and you go through. So that, I must say, I find is very useful. And it's a pleasure. But when you're traveling with all your bags and you're trying to find your boarding pass and your passport, and it's nice. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting place in the next, I think, few years, as we see how the AI really takes off and robotics takes off, and just like as things change. And there'll be a lot of discussions, I'm sure, around morality and capabilities and how it's going to be implemented.
This has been really, really fascinating. I think a lot of people that are watching may not realize all the different stakeholders that are involved, the complexity of these multinational data center development projects, the role that channel partners, resellers, integrators play in making all of this happen, and just how critical it is to be proactive as opposed to getting caught short with these kinds of initiatives. I really appreciate you sharing so generously today. I know a lot of people watching this are going to get a lot of value. It may even get them a promotion or save someone's career.
100%. And Josh, no, thank you for inviting me on, and thank you for allowing me to talk about it. I do believe that it's a matter of educating people, and especially on the C-suite side, because education is the key to really being successful today if you want to expand on a global scale.
I think actually for a lot of people on go-to-market teams throughout the data center, education is their entire future because it's the best protection against their careers being more AI-proof.
100%.
Being seen as the teachers and the consultants and the subject matter experts and the trusted advisors.
No, I think there's a space to work together with the AI. It doesn't have to take over, everything. But there's definitely, it does bring its value if it's used correctly.
Absolutely. Noah, if someone wants to follow what you're working on or reach out to you, learn more about what you're doing, learn more about what TecEx does, is LinkedIn a good place to start?
Yeah, I would say LinkedIn is a good place to start. Yeah. So I do share a lot on LinkedIn, and I've also got a newsletter. So I try and discuss interesting things that are happening within the industry and within the tech world. So I'd say LinkedIn is the best place to start.
Is that newsletter sent out through LinkedIn, or is that a separate URL for someone to visit? Okay, great. So if someone connects with you on LinkedIn, they'll get prompted to subscribe to that.
Correct.
Okay, cool.
Correct.
Yeah, we'll make sure to include that. And for someone that wants to learn more about your company, about TecEx, is the website the best place to start, or LinkedIn company page? What's your favorite resource?
I would say either the webpage, or they can also reach out to me on email, and then I can direct them to the right party or have a conversation with them. And that's just my name, Noas @techex.com. So that's probably the best. They can have a look at the website, but it is, it's often reaching out because they have a specific question. It's sometimes easier just to, I know from my experience, to talk to a human being rather than just kind of navigate a website. So always happy to have a chat.
We'll make sure to include links to all of those resources in the show notes and the blog posts along with this episode. But yeah, I've really enjoyed our conversation today. I know a lot of our viewers from all over the world, especially ones that work cross-border and multinational, especially ones that work across different parts of the ecosystem, will really, really get a lot of interesting action items that they're either going to be personally responsible for, or they're going to go to other people in their company and say, you need to watch this. I was listening to this podcast with Noah from TecEx, and are we actually doing this, or do we have exposure here?
Yeah, no, 100%. So as I said, always happy to field questions. And Josh, thank you for highlighting. And I think just what you do, through your podcast, is so valuable. And we're all learning, I think, in the space together.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I've been speaking today with Noah Sussman, who is Director of Global Solutions for TecEx. TecEx is headquartered all around the world. Noah's based in South Africa. Noah, thanks again for joining me. Really, really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you, Josh.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.